Hello and welcome. I'm your host, author Ryan M. Oliver, and this is the Mighty Books Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. I have Daniel Rice. So, Dan Rice pens the award-winning young adult urban fantasy series, The Allison Lee Chronicles, in the wee hours of the morning. Don't we all? I think a lot of us do. The series kicks off with his debut, Dragons Walk Among Us, which Kirkus Reviews calls an inspirational and socially relevant fantasy. While not pulling down the 9 to 5 or soccer dad duties, Dan enjoys photography and hiking through the wilderness. Dan, how are you today?
Oh, good. It's a little cold with the snow this time of year, but
Yeah.
otherwise,
Yeah, you said you're in Olympia.
yep,
How much sun did you guys get, just by out of curiosity?
not a whole lot, maybe a quarter of an inch or thereabout.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we got a whole bunch of nothing, just a bunch of powder blew away that day, but we're getting some record low temperatures right now. But anyway, we're here to talk about your book. We can talk about the weather if we feel like it, but your books are what we're here for. Your series, I already kind of mentioned, is the Allison Lee Chronicles. First book, Dragons Walk Among Us. Can you kind of tell us the synopsis of your series?
Sure, it's about Allison Lee, who is a teenage girl, and in the opening book, she ends up being attacked and loses her eyesight. And
Oh.
when her eyesight's restored through having actually prosthetic eyes, she can then see dragons following some people that she encounters around. And that sort of kicks off that novel, and then that theme kind of follows through with it, is that she can sort of see this other world that includes the dragons and then the consequences of that.
So what was the inspiration for this? Did it take over a long period of time for you to develop it, or was it just all of a sudden hit you like a ton of bricks?
Well, I had this, as far as, I mean, the initial idea, I guess, of just sort of like, sort of seeing the alternate world or whatever. I was kind of fascinated by the idea, like, well, I don't know, like there's a tornado or something, and then all this weird stuff falls out of the sky, kind of thing. That kind of idea, you kind of hear like whether the story is apocryphal or not. It's like, oh, there's a tornado, and then fish fall out of the sky, something like that. But
World colliding kind of a thing.
yeah, so then from there, I kind of thought, oh, it'd be kind of interesting. Somehow there's something going on and then spills over into the, reality.
Yeah.
Was kind of the idea. But then it, backburnered for, a long time because I was writing other unsuccessful things. And then eventually, I came up with this idea, kind of coalesced, I guess, the back of the mind, and then I went with it.
Now, so I'm curious about in the beginning. So I've gotten through just a couple of the first chapters of Dragons Walk Among Us. You open up to Allison at a photography contest. And so when you said just now about her gift, she actually loses her eyesight. Was photography a pivotal part of your upbringing? That's why you threw it in there, or was this something kind of convenient, kind of ironic that she loses her eyesight and is a photographer?
So I thought with like the photography, because I've done photography myself. I was probably in college before I started doing it, so not exactly growing up.
Yeah.
But I figured, like in the writing group I am part of. We at one point we had a resident writer who was fairly successful. So he was always he one of his things was, oh, you should always, not necessarily write what you know, but he was always like, well, even though you're writing fiction, you should write. His thing was always like, oh, you should try to teach the reader something. So I don't know if I'm not trying to necessarily teach the reader about photography, but something I know about, so it's easy to kind of give like telling details to make it more realistic or whatever,
Mhm.
and then make the character seem like she knows something about photography instead of kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's sort of write what you know idea.
Okay.
So that was pretty easy, and then have it be a part of the character.
Yeah, I've definitely found that's an interesting thing. Take some of your fractions of your own life and put it into the character. Makes it so much easier for at least the author to write it, and then as the reader, learns more about them, it becomes just that's just a part of who they are, and it makes it
Yep.
more relatable, I guess you could say. Again, with I'm sure you go into it deep with the book because it is a series. But can she only see the dragons, or other people can too?
She can only see them unless they manifest themselves in the, here and now kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So other people see them, but so they're like, they're, I call it, they're riding the slipstream. So when they emerge, then they emerge and they're like, solid dragons and can bite you and breathe fire on you, etc.
Yeah.
So then they have physicality. But when they're not doing that, then only she can see them.
What exactly drew you to fantasy? Did you do a lot of reading or watching shows or movies that had a fantasy element to them?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like the Lloyd Alexander books. Those are probably some of the early fantasy books I read. It was like Book of Three and Black Cauldron, that kind of thing, and Tolkien.
Oh yeah, Tolkien.
And then, I mean, it's sort of a sci-fi, but Dune was kind of my favorite book for a
Sure.
long time. And I thought, that has a lot of fantasy elements.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah, the fantasy sci-fi kind of blend together nicely. It's almost like, well, which is what? And usually sci-fi is more futuristic. Fantasy is a little more either like old, or it's involving some kind of mythical element, and in your case, dragons or other beasts or something like that. Because I know my series involves a lot of different mythical beasts into it too. Makes it more fun. Now, with making it more of a relevant social aspect into the story, what made you decide to do that with your story, or did it kind of just happen by accident?
when I came up with sort of the opening chapter of the first book, so in that, so Allison's biracial, and then she kind of gets bullied or whatever because of the way she looks. So that where that came from, that aspect was just it was probably I mean, I don't remember if it was like before I started writing it, or maybe, the novel, or maybe when I was working on the draft.
Sure.
But anyway, my older son, he's biracial. So he was at, summer camp or whatever. And I mean, at the time he was probably, he wasn't very old. He was in elementary school age. But anyway, so at the summer camp, he was getting bullied about, oh, whatever, shape of his eyes, color of his skin, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So he came back, and then he was like, I don't know how long it went on, but you could tell he was kind of in a poor mood after that. So then kind of find out, oh, okay, you were bullied, and then or whatnot at the camp. So anyway, that kind of then I thought, oh, okay, that would be kind of an interesting opening sequence, something along those lines. So that
Mhm.
kind of had that aspect of it. I did try like to have lots of, I guess representation or whatever, just because, you go to the schools now, like when I went to the school, I mean, like 90% of the kids were white, and then there's a few other people from, different areas, origins. But now you go to the school, and I mean, it's like, it's just the more of the color of the rainbow kind of
Mhm.
experience.
The
So
melting
I
pot.
thought, well,
Yeah.
if it's going to be relevant to people who like the younger generation, I mean, then you should try to make it relevant. I mean, not be too much. And then another aspect, I guess, was like, so anyway, so Allison has sort of an environmentalism streak in her. And what kind of got me thinking about that was that just listening to some of the my sons, like whether they act out, with what they come home and talk about. I mean, they're certainly more aware of that kind of stuff than I was at their age.
Sure.
And then also, I mean, like in the news, you hear stuff about, oh, we're going to sue the federal government as students because of the future type of thing. So I thought, well, there's an issue that whether everyone agrees with it or not, seems like the target audience, it's something they're thinking about. So that
Mhm.
was kind of where it came from, observing the older son, and then kind of observing what's going on in the news, and kind of like, well,
So is it a modern fantasy, or is it one set in like a, 10, 15, 20 years ago in that earlier 2000s decade.
I don't think I ever mentioned the year anywhere.
Yeah.
And at least in my mind, it's just kind of contemporary. I mean, it's
Okay.
could either be today or a few years ago or a few years in the future.
I
You
usually
know,
gauge it by the technology that's talked about in the
yeah,
story. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, there's phones and cars and that kind of thing.
Oh
But
yeah.
one thing is like my publisher, they don't want any, like brand names, because I
No.
guess they've had. So by eliminating the brand names, I mean, on one hand, I can like read something by Stephen King, and he will name what the car is or whatever, and you have a really strong image of what's going on. But on the other hand, just by making it a little bit generic, leaving out like iPhone or this or that, it blurs, I think, the exact time a little bit, which is kind of nice. Sure, it's going to be dated at some point, but not immediately dated, that kind of thing.
No, we cars and phones aren't going away anytime soon. I mean, if you just put smartphone, everyone's gonna have an idea of what these, rectangular looking things are. They're useful. And I mean, honestly, do we really care unless the phone or the car is pivotal to the story, like in, let's say, a mystery where someone finds a phone or a car and it's important to the investigation? I don't think it's that important to have a small detail like that for something like a fantasy. I don't think so, at least. But
Yeah.
it can change with whatever your context is, I guess. Did you have to do any kind of research at all for this? Or it sounded like you kind of did with talking with your kids, and just kind of looking at the news and how the world's changing and how the cultural temperature is. But did you do anything extra?
A lot of the first book kind of takes place around Seattle, the greater Seattle area. Like
Yeah.
they're sort of there. So I kind of have a feel for the area, but I mean, I did research some things to kind of get like, so I could name a street and then have it know that I'm talking about the right area and then part of it, sort of the climax takes place at Mount Rainier. So I
Cool.
mean, I basically know that area pretty well. But so I did do some research, and there's some stuff that takes place, I think, in a warehouse. So I kind of made sure I had an idea where the warehouse district of Seattle was, that kind of thing, but not probably no like deep dives, like, you run into these people that just research.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
that's
Historical,
not me.
historical.
I think it's enough just to plan and write and edit it, when you have a day job and everything else.
Oh, I
I
know.
think.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do this. So what do you do for work during the day?
Oh, I work in IT, so I do programming, I do some project management, business analysis.
So you get to come home and knock out some work in the it says the wee hours of the morning, probably the only time you really have to mull over
Well,
ideas.
that's when everyone else is asleep, so that's the best time.
So how do you balance working a full-time job, having your family, taking care of the family and just balancing all that and getting writing done? Do you have a set time you write, or is it just kind of when the inspiration strikes?
I mean, under typical circumstances, I'll write every day, and then I'll do it in the morning. I'll get up 4:30 and do some for work. And on the weekends, a little bit looser, just depends on what's going on. I mean, I'll definitely write, but especially once soccer starts up again, we lots of traveling around on the weekends for that kind of thing. But usually weekdays, early morning before work, and on the weekends, as much as can get done without getting up at the crack of dawn, before the crack of dawn.
Yeah, we're still trying to get some sleep in. That usually is a
Yep.
pretty important still.
Catch up. Yeah.
Yeah. Said your kids are in soccer?
The older one does a lot more, and the younger one, he wasn't quite sure he wanted to do soccer, but he has recently started doing it, and he's doing more and more.
That's
But
good. That's good.
his brother's extremely good, so he's sort of like, if I want to do this,
Yeah,
maybe I want one thing.
absolutely. Well, that's cool. Now, so are your stories, are they aimed for the aimed for young adults?
I mean, yeah, I don't know how many. I mean, you know how it's like they're aimed at young adults, but there seems to be a wide gamut of people who will read the genre. Though I mean, way more. And then there's sort of that new adult, young adult, and how those kind of merge. Sometimes they seem to merge, and sometimes they don't. But yeah, the intent is definitely the young adult and sort of that. I don't know the probably the 12 to 18 age range, probably
Yeah.
even under the 18.
I found a lot of the young adult, or quoted young adult
Yep.
stories out there. They're getting kind of, I'm gonna use the word mature, at least on the violence front and the action.
Mhm.
They've definitely taken a little up a notch. I think that's just kind of how naturally it's become, even with movies and TV shows these days. Oh, they're for, 13 and under, but like there are some things that you might question. But I mean, was that something you thought about, is trying to keep it to that appropriate age content, or you just kind of write it as a story required?
So, I mean, it's like an adventure. So, I think that kind of lends itself to some of the action. I don't try to, I try, I mean, probably more on the gore and violence. There's really no like sexual
Yeah.
content type stuff. So in that sense, it's definitely more on the young adult side opposed to like new adult or whatever they want
Yeah.
to that that sort of more mature but still young adult dish.
Yeah.
But there is some violence and gore, but I don't think it's over the top. And I do try to keep the language. I try to keep the language generally, not too many curse words or anything. And I mean, for one thing is, I think actually in the first one I had a curse word, and then a bunch of people, some people complained about that specifically. And there was maybe like one instant, and as I recall, it's like sort of the smarmy kind of,
Yeah.
not the antagonist, but the not so nice guy who in his light said one time. And so I got some criticism on that, I remember, in some reviews. And I try to keep the
Swearing to a minimum.
swearing to a minimum. For one thing, if you do it, unless you're just going to go over the top or something, I think if you put in for effect and or for humor or whatever, well then you're losing some of your impact if you either have to go one extreme or the other, where it kind of loses its impact.
Hmm.
So I've gone with, since it's young adult, I've gone with very few. I think, in fact, as the books have gone, there's probably less,
Oh,
less
really?
swearing.
Yeah, those are sentence enhancers, as I've I've talked to some friends of mine. They're sentence enhancers. Like, okay. They are. They do help, and it does hit home, and a precisely placed swear word does kind of emphasize the point someone's trying to make sometimes in certain stories. That's a fact. But yeah, it's where do you use them, whether or not you, and I've heard a couple authors I've talked to, it's hard to get a complaint about a swear word that aren't there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Yep.
Yeah. When you were writing these, first off, how long did it take you to write? Let's talk about Dragons Walk Among Us. How long did it take you to write that one?
Well, I mean, I do plan, so I mean, I do a certain amount of planning. So between planning and writing, I probably it took me a year to write it. I mean, plan it and then write it. And then this one, I spent a lot, probably a lot more time editing it to get it up to snuff, just because I mean, I'd never had worked with a editor before or had a publisher or work with editors with them. So I spent a lot of time editing on it and submitting it, and then not getting positive responses and editing more. And then at some point, I think it was through, I mean, I'm not a member, but Pacific Northwest Writers, I was on their email list. And then there was some, thing like, oh, if you sign up to do editing with this person, I don't know, within the next so long, I mean, you get a really good deal. And I thought,
Right.
and I looked at other ones, and it was like $1,000 or whatever minimum. And
Yeah.
so this, I forget how much this person was charging, but it was like $300 or something.
Oh, okay.
And he seemed to have like a long and list of clients. So it seemed like it was really seemed like a bargain. So I had did that, did what, the suggestions there, submitted it, got more interest. And then I did a huge amount of editing.
Yeah.
Again, still I was like, well, it's something's not right. It's not quite there. And then I got more traction. So the editing and going through all that probably took on this one as long to plan and write the novel.
Editing is a huge part of it. And if you find a good editor, they can help you communicate the story to where
Mhm.
hopefully you want it to be.
Yep.
I mean that it can make a difference between a good book and a not so good book. It definitely can. So having someone you can communicate with well and they can help facilitate your story, it's priceless, absolutely priceless. Did you incorporate using alpha or beta readers?
I mean, the short answer is no. I mean, the longer answer is I kind of try to treat the writing group as much as possible as sort
Yeah,
of the alpha, beta. When I read like a chapter or scene or whatever, and then I get whatever feedback they have, then I'll say, okay, well then how do I apply it to, the other things? And then if there's like a chapter that I think's maybe it's not as exciting, or it's the pace maybe it's not as fast as I
right.
thought it should be, or it's more of a travel log, I might read that and then see what the feedback is, and then if I have a chapter I think, well, this one's really exciting, then I might read that. I mean, so do they think it's really exciting, or is it just, the rose-colored
Just me.
glasses?
Yeah.
And then I'll try to do that. I mean, I know a lot of people will use beta readers and stuff, but it also seems like just another time, you're putting it out and then you're getting feedback. And it seemed like, the runway from start to end product's already pretty long.
Yeah.
And how many, if the story's good, how many opinions, do you need?
Oh yeah, there is that fine
That's always
line.
been my perspective on it.
I absolutely agree with that. I want some kind of feedback because you're so close to the story. You think it's great because it came out of your head and it's like this is my mind baby and it's awesome and it's gonna be great. But then you hand it off to somebody. What do you think of this? They go, I'm confused. Oh, okay. Or I don't jive well with this part. Well, that's just one part. Not everyone's gonna like everything you put down. So
Yep.
yeah, when is enough enough? And I mean that you're gonna have to be the one who calls that. So a few opinions I think is probably good. Trusted opinions, someone who's going to give you good feedback, but not, I don't know, detrimental, awful. I only want to hurt you feedback, constructive feedback. So I
Yeah.
get you 100% there. Yeah, it's not ever going to be perfect, but it's, you got to get out there in the world. And so it looks like you're working on you've got two books out currently. You're working on a third or you're publishing a third.
The third one it's with the publisher. It's all gone through, the editorial and galley process. So I'm just waiting on the release date.
Oh, cool.
So they have like I forget how long the wait was, well, like with the first book, but the waits just got longer. The ramp from when you get it all turned in and like it goes through all the proofreading and whatnot,
Hmm.
rounds of it, to when they give you a release date. So I don't know when the release date will be. This I'm thinking it will probably be in the summer. That one will be out, but I'm working on the fourth book right now, which will be
Nice.
the last one in this series.
That's exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah.
How far are you on the fourth one?
I mean, I'm writing the rough draft. I'm probably, I'd say, not halfway, but
Okay.
well over a third. I
There
mean,
you go.
I know I'll have tons to cut. I have to get it under 100,000
Oh, okay.
words, and I know, like, from the third one, I mean, I planned it out. I feel like I planned it out really well, but what ended up, despite that, I seem to write way more than I need, which I guess I think, which is better than writing way less, because then you have a lot of stuff you can play around with and cut when you're editing. I'm pretty sure I'm setting myself up for that again, but that's all right.
Yeah, that's a hard one too, is how much do you actually cut? And it's the hard choice of what scenes drive the story and what scenes don't. So, and I assume you've probably gotten a little better at figuring that out as you've published more books.
I think some of it is like, you kind of have a subplot and you think the subplot, it's kind of interesting, and then you kind of like, okay, I'll have a subplot here, and it'll add another layer of complexity. But then once you write it, then you go back and you read it, you're like, well, this is way underbaked.
Yeah,
So when I find stuff like that, I mean, since I know I have to get under a certain word count, then I'll
right.
just, unless I'm like, unless I do think it's for some reason that, oh, this is quintessential to what
The story
is
is.
needed for the story, I'll just cut it out and just review. I'll be like, okay, that's half baked. I mean, it seemed like a good idea, and maybe it was, but it's not
Right.
needed. So I try to do a lot of that. And then the other thing I'll do is a lot of consolidation. Like sometimes, you'll be going along and I'll be like, oh yeah, and then they're gonna go here. So I'll write, oh, and I'll have some little travel logs and stuff. And maybe there'll be some interesting characterization, but then you'll be like, well, I can kind of cut out this travel log, pare down this conversation that's illustrating that, and it's being characterized, cut out, some stuff that's not needed. Just
Yeah.
cut from scene to scene.
Yeah, it takes some time to really do that because you want almost everything you write to go in the book. You just do. Like it's important. It's quintessential. I have to have it. And then someone's like, "No, you really don't." You're like, "Do I?" You really reflect on it. Okay, I guess I don't have to. But the cool thing is, at least what I've found is there's certain stories like this is not important to the main drive, but I could pull this out and make it its own thing and make it fully baked and as
Mhm.
a, either a novella or a future novel in the future. So there's so much you can do with all those little I'm gonna call them side quests, little side stories. No problem. At least I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, any of that. I mean, whether it's a spin-off or a whole different world or set of books, I mean, you can always mine things, I think, that come up. I mean, I have to think for a second, but I think I have, when I cut things, a lot of stuff, I'll put it into like, oh, here's the cut from the manuscript file. So I'll save it. So I
Yeah.
guess I could go back and mine it if I was inspired.
Yeah, I would. I mean, you spent time writing it.
Yep.
You might as well keep it in a file. It's not going to hurt anything. And I use it as inspiration sometimes, pull it out like, oh, this was cool. However, it's not needed. So I'll use it for a rainy day when I'm don't get anything on my mind and I want to let it flesh it out a little bit.
Mhm.
So it's always fun to kind of dive on those little side stories. Uh, so now after the series is completed, after you have your fourth book out, which I imagine will take another year or two, depending on how fast you are with the rough draft and the process. It is a process. Will there be anything after this series? Is there anything else kind of cooking in the back burner?
Yeah, I mean, I have several ideas for things I might do like after it. I mean, I have one novel I might pick up
Yeah.
and edit, so that's a possibility. I mean,
Okay.
I feel like I'm better at editing now, so it wouldn't. In the past, it always seemed like, oh, why would I? It'd be much easier just to start clean because what was before was so bad. But now that I've more refined editing skill, there's that. I have another thing that's half written that I had worked on quite a bit when I was submitting the Dragons Walk Among Us.
hmm
I worked on a totally different thing, and then I stopped and then subsequently wrote the follow-up books to the sequels to this
hmm
one. Then I have other ideas. I kind of taken with the idea of like a sort of a post-apocalyptic
There you
thing,
go.
kind of a when I was thinking about it initially, it's sort of like a Logan's Run meets sort of a Walking Dead kind of idea. I mean, there wouldn't be zombies, but there'd be kind of like an age like thing, and then there'd be sort of like monsters, and it'd be I think it would be YA, kind of, it'd
Okay.
be the kids, but then once you reach a certain age, then bad things could happen. You'd be one of the monsters type ideas. So
Hmm.
that and working on it, I mean, that's kind of been bouncing around back in my mind. So I have
Cool. Yeah.
possibilities.
Do you have I know I do. I have got a list of document dedicated to just new ideas because I get bombarded with new ideas all the time. And if I don't put them somewhere, I'm going to just focus solely on those and never focus on what I'm working on. Do you have something like that?
If I have some idea that if I remember long enough to sit down and like at the computer, like with the writing group, and when we had a resident writer, so he was big on planning. And one of the things he always talked about, one of his big things was that he liked you to get down to an idea that was just like one sentence, and it would like capture the
The
theme of
essence of
whatever.
it.
But
Yeah.
I could never really do that. But then you take your idea and you turn that into, he called a concept, and it was like a one-page thing. And the idea being that you'd be able to introduce the protagonist, the antagonist, you kind of lay out the major plot points. And he was always big, you had to get it even down to like half a page, but I'm more like a page probably.
Yeah.
Because if usually it's fantasy or sci-fi, so you kind of have like, oh, I want to put in this little detail. But anyway, if I have one that I really think's okay, I'll write up a concept, and then I'll say, so I have a few of those. And then the writing group I'm with, that's one of the documents they like to hear is the concept, like what's the story about. So it's sort of, and then once I've been with the publisher, they want a synopsis, when you
Sure.
sub it. So then the concept, even though it's not like the back jacket synopsis blurb of the book, but I
Yeah.
have been able to reuse it and then use that as just synopsis. So
Okay.
when I send it off to my editor, I might go and I'll get my synopsis. I'll look at it and I'm like, okay, I better clean up these grammatical errors, and then I send it off. So it does save time that way too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. As you get better with understanding how things work, you can usually pump things out faster and with that higher quality too.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's definitely, you know,
Yeah.
I
That helps you out
it's
with
like,
that advertising and such, marketing and whatever. So,
yeah,
speaking of marketing, I saw you do a blog. Can you talk about a little about your blog?
I started. Well, I mean, the reason why I started it was, probably read somewhere, oh, you need to have a blog. And so I decided to go ahead and have one. Probably around the time I started to get a few short stories published. So I mean, it was also a place where I could like put down the short stories and then put a link there, not only to kind of be like show I had credentials, but then to kind of I knew like where I had sent the thing, had it published, because
Yeah.
a lot of it, since it's all email, if you don't keep close track of your email, it's easy to, well, I know what happened to that. So
Hmm.
it's also a place to do that. And then at some point, I mean, I don't know, at first it was really hard to come up with blog posts and whatnot. And at first I kind of thought, oh, I could write like, I was thinking, well, what should I write about that I could write about regularly? So I think at some point I was like, oh, you'd read those different books on writing. So then I might say, I think I started writing like writing tips. Oh, like here's the tip I read about in such writing book, whatever it might be. Like I think one of the first ones I wrote about something from like I think Damn Fine Story, or no, not yeah, Damn Fine Story. Anyway, it's a Stephen Fry book on writing. Then it turned into like, oh, here's my progress in trying to get published. And
Yeah.
then and once I started doing that, I started posting pretty regularly. I mean, now I've gotten to where I'll try to post about once a week. I don't know. It's usually about books or writing or TV show, like whatever. sci-fi or fantasy things on Netflix. They have lots of stuff, or
Yeah.
Disney. So that's kind of what I do now. And sometimes I write about I'll write something about like, oh, here's what I'm trying on marketing. I'm trying
Ah,
this, that. Those actually do really well, even though I don't know anything about much about
marketing.
marketing that's has a huge amount of success.
Sure.
That does attract more
More hits.
viewership than, yeah, or anything than any
Yeah.
of those.
Everyone wants to get their stuff out there, and marketing is the way to do it. So if you
Yep.
have insight in it, people generally want to at least investigate and see what your experiences are. So, where can people get copies of your books?
Well, basically, any of the retailers, especially in the online space, the Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Okay.
Google, iBooks, all those things,
Nice.
it's available at any of those.
Awesome. Yeah, good stuff. Well, go get some fantasy, guys. That's what you need to go do. Go read a lot. It's cold. At least in Washington, it's cold. What are you gonna do? Go outside and freeze? No, you're gonna stay inside, stay warm, and read about dragons. That's what you're gonna
Good
do.
idea.
Yeah. So Dan, thanks a bunch for coming on here, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And when you get done with your last series, or the rest of the series, last book of the series, we can chat about that and, get you some more exposure. Hopefully get some more good readers under your belt.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely drop you a line when the fourth one fourth one comes out.
Awesome. Excellent. Excellent. All right, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this. As always, take care and stay mighty and keep reading. Are you an author? Do you know someone who is? If so, then message me, Ryan Oliver, at ryanmoliver.com to set up a free appointment to discuss being showcased on the Mighty Books podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the Mighty Books YouTube channel and share the link to this and more episodes with your friends and family. Thanks for listening. So long for now. Stay mighty and keep reading.